Welcome to Writers Not Writing, your weekly book podcast where your favorite writers take a break from writing to talk about the one thing they love to do. This is episode 2 of season 2. The date is March 19th. Today's episode will be an interview with the debut novelist Jacob Rundle to talk about his first novel, Augur of Shadows. All right, thank you so much for joining me today, Jacob.
I appreciate you asking me to be here.
All right, so I believe at the time of recording this episode, your novel comes out in 3 days, right?
Yes, in 3 days.
All right. So how does it feel to leading up to the release of your novel?
So it's very exciting to see all of your hard work like coming. I mean, I don't even want to say coming to an end because it's really just the beginning. At the same time, it's also kind of nerve-wracking because I always say, like, this novel is my baby. So you're seeing your baby about to be released upon the world. And once it's out there, I mean, every novel or every author, wonders what kind of criticism that he or she will receive, based upon, their writing. And so it's a little nerve-wracking, but at the same time, it's really exciting to see people's see their reactions to it. So it's kind of a twofold thing.
All right, and so leading up to that, you were talking about criticism. So have you given the novel out to like friends and family members to get some early criticism of it, or have you kind of just been keeping it to yourself, waiting for them to get it on release day?
So initially, when I started, I didn't want anyone to see it, because like I said, this is my baby, and at the same time, as any protective parent would be, an author is just as protective of their writing as a parent would be, But no, I gave it to during the whole process. I gave it to friends and family and to numerous beta readers because I needed feedback. And so when I finished my first draft, and after all the revisions and editing and working with my editor, and I finally had my ARC ready, my advanced reader copy, I gave it out to numerous people that I trusted. Because during the process, an author has to really trust the person. Because even in this stage, there's still time to do quick reviews or changes or whatever before it's released. And so I gave it out to a good number of people, and I've friends, family, and people that are fellow authors, people that I don't know personally, because your friends and family may or may not give the most constructive criticism versus someone who does not know you. And that's another hard little area, because a writer just can't take in positive criticism, because in order for an author to grow, you have to receive the negative as well. So yeah.
And have you been in kind of critique groups before, or was this kind of like your first kind of approach to them? Like, was this your first time getting included and getting critiqued on your work?
No, I've always throughout the process of writing, Augur of Shadows, like I said, initially I didn't give out big chunks of it, but I still would ask, fellow authors, their opinions. I'm like, I have this idea. How do you feel about this? And so I would have in-depth conversations on where it could go, because again, I can only speak for myself. I get too excited, and so there are just too many ideas and too many avenues a book can go. And so I would ask, hey, if I went this way and this is where I see it going, would this appeal to you? Because even though an author has an idea, my goal is to have it. I want the story to be different, because as a book reviewer and a book blogger, I read so many books, and since I'm writing, I want it to be different, because honestly, that's the one way that you're going to stand out compared to all the other people out there that are trying to do the same thing. And so that was one way. And being, I guess I call them like duo critique groups. I mean, it's not really a group because it's two people. But then later in the process, I was in a bigger critique groups, on Facebook, or I found some on Twitter, or just local ones here in New Orleans. So, I got out of my shell. I was like, you know what? If I want to be, a quote unquote successful writer, I can't be afraid to go to a critique group, because I can't be afraid of someone saying, I don't like your novel, or I don't like the idea. I had at least 5 people tell me, I don't like your title. And like, oof, again, it's one of those things where, I'm trying to be different. I didn't want to use, a seer, because that's just so overly used. I did my research on, synonyms and, what those different classifications meant, in different time periods. So I would say critique groups were a big impact on this.
All right, and you were mentioning about how you're striving to make this novel different from the many novels you read as a book reviewer and a book blogger. Can you kind of share with us what you put into this novel to make it feel unique, and give it its own unique aspects to it?
Yes, and this is one of the areas that I love to talk about, because I'm very proud in the fact that as a Caucasian male, I have a lot of God family that are Latinos, African American, and just family from different areas and different walks of life. And one way that I feel like this story is different is, one, the idea of apocalypse. Like, what does that mean? If you're a religious person, you have this connotation. But what if you're not somebody who's a religious person? What does that actually mean? And especially nowadays with, The Walking Dead, just, subjects like this, and wanting to be different, I wanted to do my own twist to it. And so when you say, like, how is my novel different? I try to use the term, or the idea, that the apocalypse isn't necessarily the end all be all. I mean, it means, the end of something. But what if it is the only way for someone or a group of people's survival? Like, what if they had to do it? What if they had to bring this cataclysmic event in order to be successful in whatever, whether it's a battle or whatever? Like, what if they had to do that? And that is probably like the biggest difference. Because, I read where the apocalypse happens, and then it's a dystopian type future, or a quote unquote post-apocalyptic future. And I'm not saying,
so things of like things like Hunger Games.
Yes, exactly. And again, try not to give away too much, but I didn't.
Yeah, I feel you.
I didn't want to necessarily go that route, and I'm not saying, because this is a series. This is just book 1 of 4, and I'm not saying that in the later books that the environment won't turn out that way. It may or may not. Again, trying to be different. Hopefully not. But I didn't want to do like, okay, well, the world's ending, everybody freaks out, and now it's just, a Hunger Games type future. That's just not what I wanted to do. Secondly, because I read so many books, and because I'm a person who loves different cultures, I love different languages. I mean, I majored in Russian in college. I studied Spanish, German, just everything, any language you can think of, I've studied. And one thing that I did not see is I didn't see any of these dystopian type novels talk about or have any characters that were Latino that would go through this, or have any characters that were African American. It was just like, and I'm not saying that all these characters were like Caucasian characters, but there was no like reference to the effect of their culture during this time period, because I wanted the idea of the apocalypse, like I said, even though it is the end of something, but it's the beginning of something else. But I want to see their reaction, because it's very important now that the people of color getting their voice, the LGBTQ community, like all these different groups of people, like what is their reaction in the story? It's not just, the stereotypical white male rushing to do something, saving the day. I'm like, no, well, what if there's like because I have three main characters. One is a 17-year-old Haitian boy. I have Henry, he is a white male. But then I have Elena, who is a 18-year-old Latina. Like, these three individuals from different cultures have to come together to fulfill this destiny that they unfortunately did not choose to have. But, fate is, fickle like that. So they have to come together, even though they're different in all these different areas. But they still have to come together and do this one thing.
Yeah, I totally understand about that need for representation in young adult literature. You said that this was a series of 4 novels. When you first started writing this story, did you know that this was going to be a series, or did you just kind of start off writing and then it kind of became what it became?
Actually, initially, I knew it was going to be like the main series is going to be 4. Like, I just knew that there was just going to be, in order for the story that I want to tell, it had to be in 4. I'm going to say 4 different chunks of time. And so when you read the first book, this happens, and then, because currently I'm working on book 2 and 3, and there is going to be a time jump, because you can't really expect an event like this to occur and then just like everything happens all within like the same year. That just, to me, that's not really like giving really good world building and really good character development, because how much can a character go through until they crack? You know what I mean? And so as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh, like I had to map them all out. I was like, okay, this all happened in book 1, this is in 2 and 3, and then this is 4. But what I didn't know is during the process of writing book 1, or finishing book 1 and starting book 2 and 3, that I'd have to, not that I have to, but I want to have an actual prequel, in the fact that during the events of book 1 and 2 and 3, I've kind of created this, it's another narrative of a time before time, if that makes any sense, that will further explain why it is, like why things happen the way that they do. So
you also mentioned earlier about the whole Russian literature thing in university. How did that actually kind of impact and work itself into this novel?
it really played a huge impact, because I've always been somebody, I was raised to treat everybody equally, where it doesn't matter like what gender you are, how you identify yourself, what language you speak. It's all about love and compassion, and that was the way that my mother wanted me and my siblings to be. And I'm very happy that that was the way that she raised us, because growing up and with her being that way, I found the love of language. And like I said, I majored in Russian. We grew up speaking German and English. And so I grew up with this love and appreciation for different cultures, and there's nothing wrong with that. And by doing that, you learn about other people and where they come from and what they've been through. And I always had this idea for the story growing up as well. I just never did it. And so when I finally decided to start writing, I told myself I want this to be different. I want to include all these different cultures, because when something like this happens, everybody's affected. It's not just people in America. You know, you're talking whether or not you believe in multidimensional theory, like this event, this, you know, primordial evil that I write about isn't going to discriminate. It's going to do what it wants to do to people of all different cultures. And so the love and appreciation for, you know, the Latin culture and the African American culture, in just, you know, African culture and Caribbean and European and Asian, just all of it. So that excitement to bring all those different elements together really, I mean, I feel like is really shown in this story.
How long have you actually been working on the novel? Because you mentioned earlier that you kind of got the idea when you were younger. So were there earlier drafts of this when you first started working, and you just kind of been working on it over time? Or did you kind of just get into it in like the last couple of years?
So it's really funny to answer this, because people are really surprised by my answer. So growing up, like, I always had this movie play in my head of how it would go. I never wrote anything down until last year. And when I say that, people are really shocked. They're like, wow, you know, do you feel like you're rushing it? Did you give it your all? You know, did you work on enough? Do you think you should wait a year? And so when I finally last summer, I was like, you know, I'm going to write this. And so it only, for the first draft, it took me a month to write it, because again, that's just how I work. You know, I started writing. I didn't let anything stop me. That's all I did. And because I was that excited about it. And, you know, at that point, I was toying with the idea of trying to go the traditional route. And because it's a very personal decision to either go the traditional route or the indie route. And so I did all, like, I finished the first draft. I had it edited. Again, like I said, I had numerous people read it. And I went through the whole query process. Like, I queried numerous agents. And yes, I was rejected by every single one of them. And yes, it's so disheartening. It hurts your feelings. I don't care who you are. It affects you every single time. But that's part of the game. And during that, and again after that, I really sat down and thought about it, and I did even more research. Like, what are the pros and cons of both? And so after a while, I just realized that that the indie route was more. It's not even about being more lucrative. It's about having more creative control for me. I love the idea that I picked my cover, that I had the final say, which format, which font size, which font, you know, how many words it is. Because I feel like going the traditional route, and I'm not bashing anybody that does, because more power to them. I just don't like feeling like I have to write 75,000 words for a story. Because when I did query the first time, my initial draft was only 55,000 words, but I felt like the story was completed. Well, at that time I did. And so I got some feedback from some agents, and they're like, you know what, if you want to get traditionally published, you have to add like 20,000 words. And when someone's doing this for the first time, you're being told that you need to add these words just to add them. And I didn't like that. And that's really the moment when I'm like, I'm going to research both routes. And I ended up choosing going the indie route, which I'm very happy that I did.
When you were planning the novel, did you have kind of the entire story planned out, or did you just kind of focus on this first book, you plotted it and planned it out, and then now you're working on the second and third book, or did you kind of tackle kind of a brief overview plot point for all of them?
So actually, before I started writing anything for book one, I had all four books, because I do more of like a timeline. I don't do like an actual formal outline, because I want there to be room to grow during the writing process, because I feel like that's when the real magic is of writing and of creation, when you have a general idea of what's going to happen in that chapter, but when you're writing it, there might be another idea that comes to you that actually makes it better. And for me, I wanted my whole series to be somewhat mapped out, so I would have a general idea. Because again, as writers, you kind of want to throw in a little, I guess you call them Easter eggs or little hints about what could possibly show up later, which may or may not, because you want the reader to kind of question your reading, but at the same time you want them to fully understand what's going on. But I work with a lot of writers that focus book by book, which, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But me, like I said, it was a movie. Like, it was a movie in my head that I wanted to write out, to map out. And then it just so happened to be 4 books.
So the book itself is set in New York City, and but you yourself are from New Orleans. Have you lived in New York or have any background in New York?
So prior to actually writing, I was stationed in the Navy for 8 years, and one of my assignments was in Saratoga Springs, New York, which is only, I think, about 3.5 hours away from the city. When I was stationed there, I would travel or visit the city every single time I had time off. I went to every borough. I went everywhere. I just loved the idea of using that city. and so I did.
And so which borough was kind of your favorite one to visit?
Honestly, because I also have God family in each borough as well. But my favorite, like I enjoy the Bronx a lot. Queens is nice. But I also have a lot of friends in Brooklyn. Brooklyn it's changing, which is really cool. Well, I feel like some areas it's changing for the better. Other areas it's changing, but may not be for the better. But so I would honestly, out of all of them, though, I'd have to say Bronx is probably my favorite one.
Okay. And do you feel like you captured that essence of New York in this novel?
So I feel like that for the world building part, I would have to say I did, because during the process of the scenes when I'm talking about being in certain areas, I would ask my friends and family that live in those areas, like, hey, does this sound right? Is when you read this, can you see that street? Because I know that world building is one of the more important parts in any story. But for my novel, it's really more of the internal conflicts that happen with the 3 main characters. But in the other novels, with what happens, the actual world building is a little more important. It kind of shifts because you know these characters, things still happen, they still grow, they still go through things, but I can actually focus on what happens outside more so on the interior of the characters.
So this novel itself is more kind of like an interiority aspect to it in trying to actually get to understand these characters in the situation of the apocalypse, right? Or catastrophe.
Yeah. So I would definitely agree. I mean, there's still world like this. I mean, I don't just say, oh, you're in like New York, but it's not like, because again, this isn't giving anything away, but there aren't any scenes where, oh, Henry and Simeon, Simeon is the Haitian boy. They don't like take the train and go, to Times Square or anything like that, because I didn't want to use any, well-known places like that, because I feel like that would have taken away from the fact that you have these kids here who are given this unfortunate destiny. Like, that's what I wanted to focus on. But like I said, like in the other books, because these characters a little bit more, you'll see, like you as the reader will still see the world more than you do in the first one.
All right, and without giving too much away, or saying what you can, what do you feel like was your favorite scene to write in the novel? Or you can give me, or you can give me a scene that didn't make the novel.
Ooh, okay. Oh no, it's okay. I'm all about talking about my favorite scenes because even though I talk about them, people are still going to read it. But when they listen to this and then they read it, they'll be like, oh, that was that was the author's favorite scene. So my favorite scene would have to be, so Elena is, so each character, because they come from different cultures, their cultures see the concept of having an ability. I'm not going to say superpower. But Elena, she comes from the Latin community, and she is more of the earthly one who is more inclined to be connected to the elements, to the earth. I don't call her a witch in the story, because in the Latin culture, that's not what they're called. And this is where the whole knowing a culture and a language, like what terms they actually use. So she's more of like a bruja. And so there is a scene where something happens, and it's all about how much can you take? Like, you're given this destiny that you don't want, and you're told by all these ethereal beings, like, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do. And as an 18-year-old, nobody, like, okay, let's be honest, nobody at 18 is going to listen to anybody. I mean, I went through it when I was 18. So, and that's where I'm coming from, the fact that if I was an 18-year-old being told that you had to do this, and you initially had an idea that you were, you could do things, you could make things happen when you got upset, whatever. But then you see this thing happen in front of you, and then you kind of just lose all control. And within that moment, your full potential is unlocked. A potential that you never knew that you had. And because I wanted my story to be more realistic, that doesn't mean it's all butterflies, that everyone around you isn't affected. So she loses control. And because she is connected to all the elements, I guess I kind of use the image of, just think of Storm from the X-Men, how she is connected to the elements. And I'm not saying that she is Storm. I'm just saying that is just a good example is if you read comics, whenever she would lose control and she's connected to elements, because she is connected, she's not just connected to the elements, she's like one and the same with them. So when she's upset, her internal struggles are displayed on the outside. And so things happen, because she's connected, the weather can change, the earth can shake. It's, just stuff like that. So that I would have to say that is probably my favorite scene. And giving a character that sense of vulnerability, because at that moment you feel like she's lost everything, and there's no other way to express her sadness, her sorrow, her sense of loss. And because of that, and because she had this inner potential that she didn't even know, that's how it's expressed, if that makes any sense. So I use a lot of, because I'm very big on like comics and movies and stuff like that, and so you can use the image of like just picture Storm or Jean Grey from the Marvel universe, or if you watch, like I watched Buffy growing up, like her friend Willow, whenever she got upset, she was connected to all the elements and magic and stuff like that. That was the way that she expressed her sorrow, her anger, because that's the only way that she knew how to.
And speaking of movies and comic books, was there a particular movie or comic book that helped you kind of frame this novel?
So I would have to, I would have to say any kind of movie that has any character that has an ability, because I'm more prone to fantasy stories, and just because it's a lot more fun to me. So anybody that has like a magical ability or just some kind of thing that makes them stand out. So whether or not that's the X-Men movies, even the DC movies, like television shows like Charmed. Like I grew up watching Charmed, and like I said, Buffy. Just just characters that are, I guess you could classify them as supernatural / superhuman. But again, that's not, I try to not have that stamp or that label in this book, because of the things that they will have to do. They're not going to be seen as superheroes or villains, because can you really use those labels when you're talking about someone's destiny, when they're just kids?
And this is your debut novel, and you learned a lot from the writing process. And what do you think is the biggest tip that you can give to aspiring novelists who are trying to get their foot in the door in writing down their first piece?
I love this question, and I stand by this so strongly, is that you have to, and this might be cliche, but it's so true. You have to believe in yourself and in your writing. And by me saying that, you also have to realize that you will not make everybody happy. You will get negative reviews. But but at the same time, there will be people who love your story, who are affected by your story, who see the fact that you wrote a novel. It really took me, because a lot of my friends and family, they would always say to me, "We cannot believe you actually wrote a book." And at that time, I didn't really see it that way. I just saw it as something like I checked it off, like my bucket list. It didn't really hit me until recently, when I really start working on, book 2 and 3, that I'm like, wow, I actually wrote a book. And so I should have really believed in myself more than I did before. Like the idea that it doesn't matter what background you come from, what language you speak, what gender you are. It doesn't matter. If you have a story, just put it down or type it down. and at the same time, you gotta believe in yourself.
All right. Thank you so much, Jacob, for joining me today. You guys can read Augur of Shadows, book 1 in the Destined series. It'll be out on February 26, 2019. You can buy it on Amazon, and I'll leave the link in the description of this episode. Thank you again for joining me, Jacob.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. We look forward to having you back again next week. You can support Augur of Shadows for only $2.99 on Amazon right now. And be sure to follow Jacob on Twitter at JRUNDY08.